On today's show, we are going to dive really deep into what is now officially going to be the biggest change in the prospect development landscape in the modern hockey era.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. My name is Sebastian Hai. I am the USHL and crossover scout over at Elite Prospects, typically joined by Hadi Kalakash, who is unfortunately out with sickness this week, but hopefully will return for next week's shows. And today we have an extremely exciting episode for you, a breaking news show, because yesterday it was officially announced that there is a massive change in the hockey prospect world at the moment, with the huge NCAA and CHL agreement taking place. It is happening. We covered this in the first segment of an episode about 3 weeks ago, diving into the nuances of what this would entail. But it is now official, so we are dedicating an entire show to this topic because there's a lot to look at. But before we dive into this really interesting episode, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So there is a lot to cover in today's episode. In the first segment, we're going to basically just do an overview of what this agreement is, how it came about, and what we're going to be discussing throughout this episode. In the second one, we're going to look at what this agreement means for the NCAA, for the CHL, for the USHL, for Junior A, and even what it means for youth sports here in Canada. And in the final segment, we're going to take a bit of a closer look on what this means for players and their developments. So also where NHL teams figure into this, how this impacts their drafting habits and philosophies, for instance, because there's a lot of domino effects that this agreement's going to have. It's going to really have effects in so many different ways, and also potentially many different ways that we're not even considering just yet. I mean, this is still breaking news at the moment, but there's definitely a lot of domino effects going in every single direction with this, which makes it quite fascinating. But let's start off here with the first segment, with the overview. First and foremost, how did this come about? What is this agreement? So this agreement, at its core, is that the NCAA is now going to, well, as of next season, so as of the fall of 2025, is going to allow players with CHL experience to play in their leagues. So in D1 NCAA and in D2 NCAA. We'll talk a bit more about what this might mean for D3 in the NCAA later on in the show. Basically, they're like it doesn't change anything. And the D3 NCAA is not going to be allowing any CHL talent in. But the main leagues, the big programs, are going to allow CHL talent. This means that you're going to see a lot more Canadian talent in the NCAA, but at its core, it is a questioning of the amateurism policies that college hockey or just college sports in the U.S. have long been a stronghold of very much keeping any professional players outside the bounds of college sports. And that was at the core why CHL players weren't allowed in to the NCAA hockey, because they were playing alongside and against players with professional contracts. So one thing that isn't changing whatsoever here is the acceptance of, or the lack of acceptance of players that have signed their professional contracts. So any player with an ELC signed is not going to be allowed into the NCAA. That has not changed in any way whatsoever. But the big question of these CHL players that have been playing with and against players that have these pro contracts, that is no longer going to be a hurdle in players actually accessing the NCAA. One of the sparks that kind of led to this whole thing developing was a lawsuit earlier this year of a player that had played a single game in a CHL uniform, which I believe was also in preseason, being blockaded from committing to the NCAA, which I mean, very arbitrary. And also a lot of players have had these qualms of wanting to commit and having just played a single game or a handful of games at the CHL level and being blocked. And yeah, that has kind of spiraled alongside with a bunch of other factors and forces to this eventual agreement that has been in the works for the last half year or so, but is now official and definitely changes the landscape of things here. This also represents a massive shift in the relationships between different leagues, whether it includes the NCAA or not. You're going to see the relationship between obviously the NCAA and the CHL developing massively and shifting significantly, but also between different junior leagues. The CHL and the USHL are going to have a very different relationship now, where the CHL is going to be even more of a powerhouse and also taking off talent likely from the USHL. A lot of like the high end elite talents of the USHL may be just picked off by the CHL because the main crux that the USHL had going forward in retaining elite level talent like your Adam Fantillis, your Matt Celebrinis, why these Canadian players took the USHL route was to play college hockey. Now there's not going to be that same draw, so you're going to see a lot less Canadian talent in attracted to USHL programs, and you're also going to see a lot more American talent attracted to the CHL, for instance, which is going to be interesting. Beyond that, there's also going to be a big impact on Junior A hockey. We'll dive deep into that in the next segment, but a lot of these relationships between leagues are the balances between those and the different attractions that these different leagues have for prospects and bringing in talent are really going to shift. You're going to see the CHL be a bigger powerhouse than ever. You're going to see the NCAA be a bigger powerhouse than ever. You're going to see a lot of other leagues suffer as a result of this agreement in terms of the elite level talent that they're able to bring in, whether that is the USHL or that is the AJHL or the BCHL. There's definitely going to be some pretty big changes with that. Beyond that, it's also going to signify a significant shift in NHL drafting habits and the optimization of what you can get out of every single draft pick because it fundamentally changes some of the pros and cons with drafting out of specific leagues and especially drafting out of the CHL relative to the USHL, for instance. The big draw of drafting USHL players for the last 10 or so years or 20 years has been the retention of those players, the how long NHL teams hold the players' rights before they have to commit a contract slot to those players. If you're drafting out of the CHL, you get to hold on to those players for 2, maybe 3 years before you have to make a decision on either signing them or letting them go into free agency or maybe just only committing an AHL contract rather than a full NHL ELC. This agreement means that CHL players will actually have a lot potentially longer than just those 2 or 3 years of being like within a team's rights without having signed their ELCs, which means that you're going to see a lot more teams feel comfortable selecting CHL players in the later rounds of the draft. One of the big questions around late round CHL flyer picks has always been that you only retain them for 2 or 3 years before you have to make that type of massive decision on whether or not to keep them, which means that a lot of those CHL drafted players just get funneled into free agency. However, if you're able to tack on some NCAA years of team control, you're going to see those late round picks be able to develop, and teams will feel a lot more comfortable drafting them in the later rounds without being forced into an uncomfortable decision within just 2 or so years. Where a lot of NHL teams, I'm thinking the Montreal Canadiens, for instance, in recent drafts have really like zeroed in on drafting out of the USHL or out of Europe with their later draft picks because they just don't want to waste picks on players that they won't be able to sign in 2 or 3 years and have a lot more time to see them develop and invest more time in their development to ensure that these are players that are also worth an NHL contract slot. So you're going to see teams potentially draft more out of the CHL in the later rounds. And you're also going to see less of a benefit of drafting USHL players relative to CHL players, which is going to be interesting. But there's a lot more effects that this has on those individual leagues, and we're going to delve into that in the next segment. But first, a quick word from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay live even if one of your players goes down injured. If your player leaves after the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Think Connor McDavid will get more than 0.5 goals next week. Austin Matthews, more than that. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this hockey season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for your candidate isn't to search at all. It is to match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with your candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences so that the more that you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, let's keep on going with the show here by focusing in on the actual individual leagues and how this agreement's going to affect them. Let's start off with the NCAA. This is the driving force behind this agreement. This has been the league that has been the most exclusionary historically based on who's allowed in and who isn't, whether that be, of course, with players that have signed pro deals being barred, which has not shifted in any way, or as we're discussing in this episode, players with experience playing in the CHL specifically. A couple things are going to change here. First of all, you're going to see a lot more talent going into the NCAA. A lot more CHL grads are going to go the NCAA route rather than going necessarily to the ECHL or to Europe if they don't sign NHL deals and don't get into the AHL. And you're also going to see a lot more 19-year-olds making that switch from the CHL to the NCAA. Players that aren't necessarily eligible for the AHL yet, aren't quite at the point of playing NHL minutes yet, but have done about everything they can to develop their game at the CHL level. The NCAA jump is going to be a very alluring one. So you're going to see a lot more talent, a lot more Canadian talent, especially coming from the CHL, and you're going to see a lot more of that talent spread out between programs. Of course, you're still going to have your powerhouses that have the strongest recruitment. Like you're still going to see Boston College, Boston University, University of Denver, University of Michigan, like a lot of these programs that have just historically been high-end recruiters, high-end developers are still going to be at the upper end of NCAA programs. But you are going to see an increased level of parity between programs. You're going to see a lot of those perhaps second or third rank NCAA programs, and I don't mean Division two, Division three necessarily, but the D1 schools that aren't quite as popular in terms of developing hockey players specifically, you're going to see them bring in a lot more talent and compete a lot more with the high-end NCAA teams, which is going to be exciting if you're a college hockey fan and want to see a bit more competition in your ranks. This is definitely going to bring that. And it's going to be interesting as well to just see the spread of Canadian talent in the NCAA. Is college hockey still going to be driven by American talent first and foremost, or are you going to see Canadian talent really come close to matching American talent among impact and difference-making players among college hockey players? It's going to be very interesting to see how that shifts, but you're definitely going to see some big changes in the NCAA. As for the CHL, there's going to be a massive leap in talent, in my opinion. A lot of the elite level prospects that forego on the CHL in order to play college hockey for a year or two before making the leap to the NHL are likely just going to want to stay in the CHL now, want to stay closer to home. You're going to also be in bigger markets compared to the USHL with bigger development staffs, longer histories of developing NHL talents as well. And the USHL just isn't going to have as strong of a draw to pull elite Canadian talent out of those Canadian junior circuits because they can just play Canadian junior hockey before making their NCAA jump now. One question might still be of when they make the NCAA jump. You're going to see CHL teams want to hang on to those elite young talents until they're 19 years old, if at all possible. So you might still see a couple players go the USHL route if they want to be playing like draft year hockey in the college ranks. But beyond that, I really think that you're going to see a lot more of that talent concentrated in the CHL. Pertaining to those age groups, I also think you're going to see a lot more talent concentrated in the 16 to 19 year age group in the CHL moving forward, because a lot of those 20 and 21-year-olds might not stay in the CHL for as long as they can and make that jump to the NCAA when they are around 19 years old, which will be interesting to keep an eye on. And you're also going to see a lot more American talent in the CHL because you definitely see some American talent there nowadays as well, whether it's like Blake Fiddler with the Edmonton Oil Kings in the WHL or Quentin Musty in the OHL. There's definitely a lot of high-end American talent in the CHL, but it's still rather limited. Most American players take the NTDP route, then go into college hockey, and then sign their ELCs after that. But there's going to be a really interesting alternative option for them now with the CHL being a path towards college hockey. As for so many American players, the dream is to be playing D1 hockey on their road to the NHL, and that's now going to be an option while also taking the CHL route is certainly going to be interesting. So the CHL is definitely going to get an added influx of both their own elite Canadian talent, but also high-end American talent, which will be very, very interesting to see how that kind of develops over the next little while. As for the USHL, there's definitely going to be a decrease in talent. I think the USHL are probably the second biggest losers of this agreement in terms of a negative impact that this is going to have on their league. You're going to see an exodus of Canadian talent. You're not going to see players like Celebrini or Fantilli play in the USHL system in order to go the college hockey route for their draft year campaigns and then sign their ELCs right after that. That type of talent is likely just going to stay in Canada nowadays, which is certainly a loss in terms of star power in the USHL. And you might also see the US NTDP as the one stronghold of draft eligible talent now in the USHL. There's going to be a lot less of a draw for draft eligibles to stay in the USHL now. A lot will want to take that CHL route if they're not brought in to the NTDP caucus. And beyond that, like these are also all players that sure, want to go to college hockey, but could also be very intrigued in having a lengthy CHL career, which just didn't have as much of a draw previously. Which could also be like it could be an indicator of like a 7 or 8 year long hockey career, even if you never really make the pro ranks, just through the CHL and the NCAA. That's some really high quality hockey that you're able to play, even if you never do get that AHL or NHL deal at the end of it. Lastly, with the USHL, there is still one clear advantage, and that is the lack of jurisdictional boundaries of where they're able to recruit and source their players from. The WHL, the OHL, the QMJHL are all limited from where they're able to recruit their talent. That is not the case for the USHL. They're still able to bring talent in from anywhere. It does mean they're going to have to probably get a bit more creative with that liberty and really try to look a bit deeper for talent far and wide. But that is still one avenue where the USHL will have an advantage and a leg up on player recruitment. The biggest losers, however, without a doubt, are the junior A leagues. It's the AJHL, it's the BCHL in Canada. There is just about no reason anymore for elite level talent to play in those leagues. It is no longer a really viable development option because there's no quite massive reason to do so. Historically, it's always been a draw of Canadian players to play in the BCHL and in the AJHL on their road to NCAA commitments, wanting to develop in Canada, but still wanting to take that leap to the NCAA afterwards. Historically, we've seen Cale McCard do this, of course, on his route to being picked fourth overall by Colorado. We've seen Bradley McNadeau do that a year ago, where he was playing with Penticton in the BCHL, then played a single season with the University of Maine before signing his ELC with the Carolina Hurricanes. And that just isn't going to be a pathway that many players are going to be convinced into taking nowadays because the CHL will just be an obvious alternative. If you can still play college hockey, why not take the CHL experience as well? Last but not least, as a quick little aside, U Sports is also going to be affected here. I know U Sports has never been the highest quality of leagues here, but there still is a chunk of talent in U Sports that comes among CHL alums. A lot of those players are just going to be funneled into like Division two or lower end D1 schools following their graduation from the CHL nowadays. So you might see a drop in talent there as well. But that wraps up the second segment. In the final one, we're going to dig into what this means for players and their development, as well as the impact on NHL teams and their drafting habits and philosophies. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. Okay, real talk. We've all been there, feeling like we're burning cash with those rent checks. It's frustrating, right? But here's the deal. Built Rewards has figured out a way to make rent more rewarding. Say goodbye to the money bonfire and hello to a renter's revolution with Built. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards a flight or hotel stay with over 500 airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them toward future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle and your needs. Pay rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built Rewards have been consistently ranked as the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent today when you go to join built.com/lockedonnhl. Make sure to use our URL so they know that we sent you. Join built.com/lockedonnhl to start earning points with your rent payments today. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need all in one place to place live bets on the NFL. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's wrap up the show here by taking a look on the impact that this agreement has on players and their development. I think the big crux here of the impact on players is an increased agency in determining their own developmental path. You're going to see a lot less players being forced into career altering decisions when they're 15, 16 years old, and a lot more control over where they play, whether it be in their early 20s or beyond that in the NHL as well, because there's a lot of impacts that this agreement has on what a player can decide for their own career path. The ruling is, of course, not extended to D3 schools in the NCAA, so you're not going to see CHL recruits there, which does limit agency a little bit for more of those depth prospects that aren't necessarily hoping to be NHLers or even AHLers someday. Those players are going to be shut out a little bit more, amongst CHL alums. But that said, there's still the European route, there's still the ECHL, there still are options there. But in terms of the benefits on player agency, this is very much restricted to the real high end talents, the ones that are on the radars of NHL fans, for instance. Another thing here is that there's going to be a possibility of CHL drafted players refusing to sign with the team that drafts them, and that is revolutionary here. This has been something that we've seen a decent amount in the last 10, 20 years of players drafted out of the USHL going into college hockey and refusing to sign with a team that drafts them. We saw it with Jimmy Vesey about 10 years ago, and a lot more recently, we've seen that with Cutter Gauthier, we've seen that with Rutger McGroarty, of players using their NCAA commitment as leverage, because whenever they finish their college careers, they have the opportunity of being unrestricted free agents and signing with whoever they want, which can force teams to either trade them or relinquish their rights in free agency. That has historically only been the case for players drafted out of like the NTDP, the USHL, or players that have already been playing NCAA hockey in their draft year campaigns. But now that's going to be the case for CHL players as well, which is a very, very big difference. There's no longer going to be the quote unquote safety of drafting Canadian based talent, of controlling their rights and ensuring that they cannot sign with any other NHL team at a certain point. Now that will be the case. So you're going to see players from Canadian leagues be able to strong arm NHL teams. Also, after a very long time, let's be certain of that. Like likely they're going to have to extend signing with an NHL team to the age of like 24, maybe even 25 in some cases, because you're going to see them playing in the CHL until they're 19, 20 years old, and then going for their 4 years in college hockey. And only after that will they be eligible as unrestricted free agents in the NHL. But it will be an option. So it'll be interesting to see when the first player is going to be to kind of exercise that option, whether that is now in 5 years or maybe only in 10 years, remains to be seen, of course. But that's a very interesting wrinkle in here in terms of added agency among CHL alums. Beyond that, you're also going to see the NCAA as an alternative for CHL players who are just absolutely dominant. I'm going to take Jordan Dumaine as an option, as an example here. A player that has mastered perimeter playmaking at the QMJHL level, has just been lighting it up there for years. He was the highest scoring QMJHL player in his draft year in 2022 and has just been doing more of the same since then, but hasn't been challenged in exploring his toolkit at that level, which has been detrimental to his development, in my opinion, because he wasn't eligible to play in the AHL and was not at the level of making the leap to the NHL for Columbus either. The NCAA is going to be a really interesting option for players in that mold, players that have kind of hit the ceiling of their development at the CHL level and require added challenge to kind of explore their toolkits and refine areas of their games and refine their habits, especially, but aren't yet eligible for the AHL, aren't yet able to play NHL minutes. The NCAA is going to be a fantastic alternative option for these players. Even if they only spend a year or two at the college level, for their development, this is going to be massive and really play a key role in terms of a stopgap between the CHL and the NHL when the AHL is not an option. So that is another wrinkle that is very interesting here. But I think that mainly wraps up this show. There's a lot more to discuss. I would love to hear your questions in the comments down below of things that this episode has not answered for you yet. If there are any other potential possibilities that are not on our radars just yet, I would love to hear from you. We're going to do a mailbag episode next week, and we can definitely answer those questions there. And also a quick shout out to Chris Peters over at FloHockey for a really in-depth breakdown on the ins and outs of this agreement. I will link that article below in the description. There's a bit more depth on certain things that I explored in this episode in that article, so I definitely recommend checking that out. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers, and make sure to leave a comment and leave a review for us. It always helps us out as well to get your feedback. And for your second listen of the day, you can go and check out Locked On Sports Today, a 24-hour news show that covers everything going on in the sporting world today. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, as I mentioned, and leave us any ideas as well for future episodes. We're always on the lookout for different topics that you are interested in us exploring. And yeah, that wraps things up. I'm Sebastian High, USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, typically joined by Hattie Kalakesh. And that wraps up a very, very interesting show here with fascinating breaking news. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope that you tune back in very, very soon.